some of the real magic that happens in these things is the conversations that people have, in those workshops, sharing stories at lunch in the hallway between these things.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Joe DeManuelle-Hall is a staff writer for LaborNotes who is hosting the Alabama Troublemakers School next week. LaborNotes is 1 week from today, so we're talking to him about that this morning. Joe, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for taking the time to talk about this. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So, LaborNotes does these troublemaker schools across the country. What for? What is the purpose of these troublemaker schools?
So one of LaborNotes' big flagship events is this conference that we do, this national conference that we do every 2 years in Chicago. And those are great. They bring together people from all over the place, but it's obviously a lift for people to get there. And the focus is a little bit more national in character, right? That people are talking from different geographies, they're sharing strategies, but the contexts can often be different. That's a really important educational opportunity. But there's a really added value, I think, in here in bringing these events to more local and regional settings, because you get people talking with one another who might share a little bit more in common in terms of the political situation that they're organizing under, and who might be neighbors, right? And getting to connect with people. So I think these things these types of events, Troublemaker Schools, which are these regional mini conferences that we do that tend to be 1 day, do a couple of things. One, I think they're important educational opportunities for a lot of union activists, especially for union activists who might be on the outs with their union leadership. They don't get a ton of support in terms of trying to learn how to organize, workshops, even basic organizing workshops, things as basic as steward workshops, learning basic stewards' rights. And so we've learned that these are really important things to be able to provide people, and that people are really thirsty for these. And every time we do them, especially recently, people are clamoring for them. So that's one piece of this, like basic organizing education. You can't have enough of it. A second piece of this, and I referenced this a little bit earlier, but is the connections and relationships that come out of these types of events, that they're open to all. Unlike some, union conferences, educational conferences, you don't have to be sponsored by your union to go there. You can, if you're a labor activist, union or not, come down, come meet some other labor activists. And I think that's really valuable and important for this type of thing. But there are just so few opportunities in the labor movement for what I've come to call these lateral relationships in the labor movement, where if you're a rank and filer in one union, you're a steward in a school in your local school district, you might never talk to a public transit unionist, even if you have the same employer and you're in the same area. You might never talk to the Starbucks worker who is organizing in your city, right? And so these kinds of relationships, if we're really serious about building a labor movement and not just a series of silos, are incredibly important. And so I think that some of the real magic that happens in these things is not the one-way kind of education thing that happens, people learning about organizing, but are the conversations that people have, in those workshops, sharing stories at lunch in the hallway between these things. And I have found them to be incredibly valuable and really important and inspiring.
Yeah, and these, I think both of those are very, very important. And so let's spend a little bit of time on each of those in the just the nuts and bolts type training stuff. What are the kinds of things that union activists, maybe they're a steward or maybe they're a rank and filer who want to become more active in their union? What are some of the things that they can, or there's somebody who's in a non-union workplace, because you mentioned that this is open to anybody that wants to come if you're interested in organizing. you can come to these things. And so, maybe you're a steward, you want to learn how to do your job better. You're a rank and filer in your union, you want to become more active, or you're a non-union worker who wants to change that, who wants to start taking some of the power that y'all have and working to protect yourselves and working to unionize your workplace. What are some of the things that they will be able to learn at these workshops?
Sure. Yeah. So from a few different angles that I think we're trying to hit this. One, there's a series of workshops that we do that are based on a book that LaborNotes put out a handful of years ago called Secrets of a Successful Organizer. That is a really great book, and these workshops really build off of that to try and get people to think about the organizing basics and how they can use organizing basics to really try to build power in their workplace and take the fight to the boss. So there's a series of 3 workshops that'll be done at the Troublemakers School that are on that topic, and that I think are as broadly applicable to already unionized as well as non-union workers, to think about really how to talk to your coworkers, how to identify leaders in your workplace, how to plan actions, how to string together actions to make campaigns that can really win and build power. Another angle that we hit this from is, we both mentioned the stewards education, which we've talked about before on the show. It's really important. Going to do something on the basic legal rights of union stewards, which a lot of stewards don't know and don't have the resources around. And while we should never be too reliant on the law to be able to back us up, it is good to know your rights, and stewards have rights, right? And it's important to enforce them. Another piece on the stewards thing, and this is very similar to the previous conversation that we had when I was on here, was about how stewards can use the issues that come up at work to try and organize, and not just play the whack-a-mole game of grievances, but using grievances to really get people involved, to take the fight to the boss, supercharging grievances by getting more people involved and really trying to win issues that way. And a third angle of the workshops that we're trying to hit there is some of the bigger picture stuff that might not fall under organizing 101 or knowing your rights, but things around labor history and how it connects to the organizing that's going on now, what people can learn about that, as well as thinking about how worker organizers, worker organizations can work in coalition with community organizations to build stronger fights that expand beyond union membership to people who are users of public services or people who care about things that are going on right now, and bringing in and expanding the base for these fights.
And those are all things that we are going to be having at the Troublemakers School next week. And another one that you didn't mention that I wanted to call attention to is the panel that's on race and labor. I think that's something that's important for us to talk about in the South, how racism affects workers in the workplace coming from the boss, and how those systems can even infect our unions, and how we can fight against that, and how we can build trust and solidarity among our coworkers and among our fellow union members. And these are all, so we've got from the workshop perspective, we've got a really broad range, and in Alabama next week, and then at these troublemaker schools across the country, from super nuts and bolts. How do I organize a union? What are some of the first steps? How do I be a good shop steward? How do I organize as a shop steward? To zooming out, broader conversations about building coalitions in the community, about, fighting these larger structures of racism and sexism and things like that. And these are all, really important stuff. And there's going to be speeches from union activists in Alabama. Mustafa Hassan from the CWA here in Huntsville is going to be speaking. Hayden Wright, of course, is going to be very familiar to anybody that's, remotely following labor struggles in Alabama. Isaiah Thomas, from the RWDSU, the Amazon Union in Bessemer. So lots of stuff for you if you are if you're a worker. If you're a worker in Alabama, there's going to be a lot of stuff for you here at this Troublemakers School a week from today. And so, Joe, let's talk about the the relationship building portion of this. What are some of the things that you have seen come out of other Troublemaker schools in the past and other locations that y'all at LaborNotes are really proud of as far as building relationships among working people across industries and across jobs?
Yeah. So, I mean, these things range from totally informal to more formal in terms of the types of connections that get built. So, at the baseline level, I think for people who are newer to the labor movement or more isolated in their corner of the labor movement, I've just seen a lot this real light bulb, eye-opening moment that feels really powerful of people realizing, whoa, other people are facing the challenges that I'm facing. I can feel like I'm banging my head against the wall, trying to get my grievances heard or what have you. And there are other people out there who are facing this too. It's not just some individual failing of mine. And I can learn from some of these people. I can share phone numbers with these people and call them up when I'm having a problem. So I think that is one of the most powerful things that happens there. I think that some of the other types of connections that get made, I remember we did a Troublemaker School in New Orleans in 2019. It was the first time we had done one there. And there were two groups of unionists who came from two different unions who realized that they represented workers at the same facility, who like in different parts of the same facility. And one of these groups was a newly elected set of officers, reform officers, and a local. And they sat down, they spent the entire lunchtime sitting off by themselves, coordinating, scheming, and left with some plans to really try and coordinate how to take the fight to that employer in a way that it hadn't been done before. And these connections are, ones that sometimes we would hope would already be made, but aren't. And that's part of what this can do, right? We're going to be doing a Troublemaker School in New York City later this year. And there are negotiations going on right now covering several 100,000 union members, public sector union members in New York City across a series of unions. And we're going to be hosting conversations where they can get together and talk with one another across these unions about what are their strategies, how are they pushing for more democratic processes within their unions, some of which are really undemocratic and anti-democratic in a lot of ways. And those connections are just ones that often don't happen anywhere else. And so it isn't necessarily about, coming out with a formal coalition or people having formed some sort of new organization. But if people come out of things like this with a plan to keep talking to one another and having made some of those connections in their head that like the next time this problem comes up, this is the person who I'm going to reach out to, I think that that's a valuable addition.
Right. And this is something that's incredibly important if, like you said, opening the show, if we are genuinely interested in building a labor movement as opposed to having individual silos where maybe we do or maybe we don't win some things in this workplace or that workplace, but instead, rather than, in addition to that, actually building a movement of working people that can fight for one another. I've been on the picket line with those folks that are locked out down in South Alabama at the paper mill the past few days, and somebody, one of the folks I was talking to was kind of interested in why I would, drive 5 hours down south to be on the picket line with them and talk to them and support them and help them try to get their story out, and it's because I genuinely believe, like deep down, that when workers win, that when one group of workers win, we all win, and when one group of workers get hurt, we all get hurt, and in a bunch of different ways. And I think that these Labor Notes Troublemaker Schools, the conference that y'all do, the low bar to entry, $30 registration fee, the broad range of folks that y'all bring to these Troublemaker Schools for both as panelists and facilitators and as attendees. I think it really facilitates that type of understanding.
Yeah, and I think a really important piece about that is that these are inherently local events. So while we do them all over the place, right? As we speak, one is happening in the Twin Cities in Minnesota right now. 300 people are getting together for this. It's different, right? The one that's happening in the Twin Cities is going to be different than the one that's happening in Alabama because what's going on in the Twin Cities is different. There are things that are applicable across those, right? Basic organizing skills, these are important, but we're not parachuting in a bunch of professional organizers from all over the country to come and tell you all how to organize. The thing that we're facilitating is bringing together people who are organizing where they're at and trying to get them to connect with one another. And I think that that's really important, right? Because
all the people that are facilitating
a small organization.
All the people that are facilitating these panels, these workshops, doing these speeches, they're almost all from Alabama. There's one Starbucks worker from Georgia that's going to be speaking, and there's a couple people from LaborNotes staff, but the vast, like 95% of the people that are doing this stuff, they're from Alabama or at least the South more broadly. And so this is, it's definitely a local event. It's not people, coming and parachuting in and telling us how to do things. It's us, y'all are facilitating us talking to each other.
Yeah, and I think that makes it all the more powerful for figuring out what to do after this, right? And really facilitates more of those connections that we were talking about.
Absolutely. Adam, did you have anything else that you wanted to add or ask him about before we let Joe go?
Yeah, I had a couple things I wanted to throw out there. Really excited about Labor Notes coming to Alabama. This is the second time that I'm aware of that there's been an Alabama Troublemaker School. Jacob, you and I and David Sorey happened to be at one a few years ago, which, had we not had that conversation and sat at that table that day, who knows if I would be on the show, right? So that's just one practical example of how the connections you make and the conversations you have can have a lasting impact. And a couple other things I wanted to just flesh out. It is a local event, and the folks who have been planning this event, by and large, are the local folks who are going to be panelists and trainers and volunteers. So couldn't do it without Louise and without Courtney, without Joe, the folks at Labor Notes who've been doing this work. But it's been volunteers also providing input, helping to set the agenda, volunteering to be trainers. So love to see that, and want to emphasize a couple other things. One, if you are a union member, Joe mentioned it earlier, maybe you're not in the good graces of your leadership, or maybe you have critiques of your union. This is a safe space for you to get training as a unionist and have those conversations and be willing to have criticism. I think that's one of the great things about a Labor Notes event, as opposed to something more official and sponsored by the institutions themselves, is that you can have more of that open dialogue. And the other thing I wanted to make sure we mention, you guys mentioned it a little bit earlier, but if you are not a union member, and maybe starting a union's not really even on your horizon right now, but you are active in the community in some way. Maybe you are active in Black Lives Matter, you're active in other social justice causes. This event is open to you. This event is for you as much as anything else. For one thing, for the connections you're going to make, but also a lot of the organizing training and skills that we're going to be working on translate into your community organizing that you're working on and the other projects that you have going on. So I know a couple ladies in Huntsville had told me they're coming. They're not really union people, but they're activist people. They're staples of the activist scene here in Huntsville, and I'm really excited to see them come, bring that community activism background, and while they learn more about labor and we learn more about them. So I think that's going to be a great thing, and just want to really highlight that. So if you're listening, you're involved in any way in the community, or you want to know how to get involved in the community, you need to be there Saturday the 15th in Montevallo. Don't miss it.
Yeah, we've got 125 people registered as of yesterday, and I think it'd be pretty cool to get it to 200. So
absolutely. And if you cannot attend, you can still help. Go on Facebook, find the event, invite all your friends.
Yeah.
Everyone you know on your friends list who's remotely interested in labor or making the world a better place in some capacity. Send them an invite, shoot them a message. You can help out that way.
And you can find it at labornotes.org/events. labornotes.org/events. Joe, anything else that you want to add?
Really excited about this. I think it's going to be great, and really excited to see what comes out of it.
Yep, I think so too. Joe DeManuelle-Hall, staff organizer for LaborNotes, talking about the Alabama Troublemakers School next week, Saturday, October the 15th at the University of Montevallo from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Going to be an after party at Zapapan's Mexican restaurant afterwards. Folks, you don't want to miss it. $30 registration, labornotes.org/events. Joe, thanks for taking your time. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.